Corporate Services, Financial Resilience Service and Transformation Committee. You're all welcome. So the first item is apologies for absence, please.
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Erica Kirshner.
I don't have any. Second item, disclosures of personal prejudicial interest. Can I speak? Then?
No.
The minutes, to approve the minutes from 25th of July. Page 1, page 2, and page 3. Can we have a mover, please? Oh, patience. And a seconder, please. Leslie. Thank you. And then we move on to item 4, which is Swansea Council co-production policy. Please, yeah.
Yeah, and Rian as well.
And Rian.
Yeah.
There we are. We pass it over to you then.
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, and Mike.
Yeah, I'll introduce
our
colleagues from Co-ProLab. So members will recall that we've been working with an organisation called Co-ProLab for almost a year now, developing our proposals and a policy, the kind of way forward on co-production. We've done quite a lot of work with people inside the council, so that'll be staff, will be councillors. We've come to this board previously, so there's been a lot of engagement going on, and Co-ProLab are the kind of experts in this field. They've been bringing their knowledge and expertise to it as well. So we've reached a point now where our colleagues at Co-ProLab have put together a draft policy. Mike from the organisation is joining us today, and he's going to take us through the draft policy. And the next step then, including today, will be for members of this board and others to give feedback and views on the draft policy, so we can finalise it and get it through to its kind of final draft in the coming weeks. And then we'll have something in place that we can consult on, take forward before Christmas. So I'll hand over to Mike, who will take us through the kind of key points in the policy. There'll be an opportunity then for members to have their say, Chair, and we can talk about where we go after today then as well.
Thank you, Lee. Mike, it's over to you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Diolch, Chair. Thank you. Very happy to be back with you again. Good to see some familiar names and faces here, but for those who are encountering this work for the first time, I'll give a brief background and context. I'll walk through the process through which the policy has been created, and then briefly walk you through what the policy looks like as well, so that we are all on the same page for any questions and discussion. And as Lee noted, I'm Mike. I'm one of the Co-Production Lab Wales team who've been supporting this work, and here to represent and speak on behalf of my colleagues and the team who've been leading this work today. So to give you some broad context for this policy, the first thing to say is this policy is one part of a multifaceted and holistic suite of support we're providing to the council, looking at how to build upon and embed co-production practices and co-production culture across your work. This wider work involves a learning phase in which we spoke to staff at all levels across the organisation to establish what existing co-pro practice looks like. It's involved the establishing of a co-production champions network. There's now there's a monthly co-production champions network meeting that's open to all staff and anyone interested in developing their co-production practice within the authority. It's included the delivery of training on the broad co-production principles, alongside specific co-production practices, for example, facilitation skills. It will include the development of a toolkit, which will sit alongside this policy and be concerned with the nuts and bolts of how you actually implement in different circumstances and different environments. And that will be inclusive of a range of case studies we will bring together. And it's also including supporting the delivery of live projects. And the first of those live projects is with the Adult Social Services team, and looking at the domiciliary care team work, producing service specifications with service users in the Gower area. So a multifaceted project This policy is intended to add value and help to connect and ensure the long-term sustainability of this work. And again, just to give a brief overview of how the policy has come into being before I share my screen to show you what the draft policy looks like. With regards to the purpose of this policy, the adoption of the policy is setting out to, firstly, ensure that co-production is considered alongside other methods of engagement and applied in all of those areas where it can add value across the entire scope of the council's work. So it's not a policy saying we must co-produce everything everywhere all the time. It is a policy saying we should co-produce where that way of engaging, where that way of working with our communities can add value and deliver mutual benefit. Secondly, its purpose is to ensure that the term co-production is understood consistently throughout the council. We acknowledge that across Wales and throughout the world, co-production means slightly different things to different people, and this policy can bring purpose and clarity. And thirdly, it's to ensure a consistent approach to co-production across council departments and when talking about co-production with other organisations and with residents. So connected to that second objective, it's to ensure not only that we're enhancing co-production practice, but ensuring that what one department means by co-production is the same as what another department means, and that we have a clear and consistent way of talking to our communities about how they can co-produce with us, manage expectations and optimise value. And in terms of how this policy has been developed with you over the recent months, we've drawn heavily on the West Glamorgan Regional Partnership Board's strategic co-production framework. We've drawn on the council's co-production for social care strategy, and we've ensured that we're building on existing strong foundations, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We've drawn on best practice definitions, and some of those have come from the Co-Production Network for Wales, our sort of sister organisation, and others have come from other key regional partners. We've also taken inspiration from the approach to co-production policies found in other local authorities throughout Wales and across the UK. We've interviewed and run workshops with staff across Swansea Council, ensuring that diverse voices from the authority are heard and are actively informing the development of this. One thing I think it's important to note and be upfront about is one couldn't with their hand on heart say we have co-produced this policy with our communities. We haven't. However, what we are setting out through this policy is the mechanisms by which and through which communities can add increasing value and increasingly have their voice heard, co-producing with the authority in all sorts of areas. The primary reason for not co-producing this policy at this stage was that there didn't feel to be enough room for citizens to shape and influence this work without it being tokenistic. It felt important that if we're going to involve people in a co-production policy, then that involvement has to be held to a high standard. We acknowledged that within the policy, we set out what co-production would look like, and we would anticipate that co-production supporting the maintenance and refining of this policy going forward. Alongside this policy, we envisage scope for a strategy to be created. And again, the development of a co-production strategy could potentially be something to be co-produced. And the policy does explain to some extent deals with the how as well as the what, but the nuts and bolts of how we will co-produce in different areas of the council's work will primarily be the concern of the accompanying toolkit, which I mentioned earlier. So with all of that said, it may be helpful to share my screen and to just briefly show everyone what this policy looks like. The first thing I would note, and something I'm sure you'll notice and hopefully be reassured by, is it's absolutely no longer than it needs to be. We've ensured that, and this is a draft that I'm sharing on my screen here, where this is consciously short, clear, jargon-free, directive, simple. We want this to be able to assist and empower all those within the authority to get on with their work and optimise opportunities and not place false complications or false constraints on anybody's desk. There will be a forward provided by Swansea Council. This is just a draft forward at present. The policy then clearly sets out its purpose, clearly sets out the definition of co-production and the values that are associated with that definition, the values that are associated with good co-production out in the wild. It situates co-production alongside other engagement processes on a spectrum of interactions alongside doing to and doing for. And it identifies the multiple hats the council must wear, the multiple and often competing priorities a council must address in its role as the regulator, provider and partner in the design, delivery and evaluation of services. It sets out the levels at which co-production can occur and their appropriateness and their relevance to council work, through from the individual level, addressing my personal needs, developing my personal support plan, through to a strategic level where we're looking at the overarching strategic direction of the development of our services. And it sets out the instances and the circumstances under which co-production is most optimal, as well as those circumstances under which co-production may not be the appropriate method to adopt, when and when not to co-produce. And finally, it deals with some high-level guiding principles that can inform all co-production work, no matter when, no matter where. Transparency about the scope for decision-making from the start. Being generous with our hospitality. Nobody being out of pocket for taking part. Planning for good well-being. Ensuring everyone's contribution is recognised. And having people informed about what happened following their participation. As you can see, very strong alignment between these principles and the ways of working we'll be familiar with from the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And finally, then we set out some roles in the process where we would see roles and responsibilities for the council, for its partners, and for its communities. Some of this story of how the policy is coming to being is set out at the back of the policy, alongside a list of relevant internal and external documents, guides, resources, to again ensure this policy is well situated and is read in context, making sure it's adding value to what already exists. And as I say, this will be accompanied by a toolkit which will move from those key issues I've outlined here and move back to practical tools to support implementation for all people at all levels of the organisation. So I appreciate that's the briefest of brief overviews, but I'm mindful of time on your busy agenda and very happy to answer any questions now, best I can.
Thank you, Mike. Any questions or observations for Mike, please? I'd like to ask you, Mike, if possible. It's been a long, long journey, you know, and we accept this draft is here today in front of us, so I thank you for that. So how has it been for you and your team working with colleagues in Swansea? I have to ask you, sorry.
It's a good question. It has been a long journey. Personally, I would say that's to be expected, and that's all part of the process. My feeling is that co-production is really, really difficult. And I say this in a positive way, and I'll say it with a caveat. It's very easy to talk about co-production. Sometimes it is easy to take those opportunities that are in front of us, but we shouldn't be naive about solving complex challenges with our communities is difficult to do. Often it's the right thing to do, but it can be difficult to do. And trying to move cultures, even if we're trying to move them in a small way, and trying to move practices, even if in a small way, is difficult. And so things have taken time. We've had forward steps and backward steps and sideways steps, but I think it's been a good, constructive, supportive and rewarding process. I can only speak for myself, but through my involvement, through the opportunities I've had to meet you in person, to meet you through sessions like this, I found this an enjoyable and rewarding process. I think we've come through the challenges well, and I think this policy is going to stand the council in good stead. So challenging, yes. To be expected, yes.
Thank you, Mike. And I think, speaking for myself, you know, we appreciate as well. It's not like working with one department or one specific group of colleagues. It's vast, you know, and we appreciate, and probably we've learned a lot from this process and a lot going forward. But once again, thank you, genuinely thank you, for your commitment and for your professionalism with working, with just as us as a team here. So the other thing I'd like to ask you is, obviously, you mentioned timelines. It's just so loose as well. I understand that. So what would you say is the best success to date? Thank you.
Again, it's a good question. And again, I feel it's important to caveat that I sort of drawing on my personal experience and involvement here, knowing that if our full team were with me, we all see a different key success. One thing which strikes me that was a personal light bulb moment and an enjoyable part of this process was being able to join Cabinet in Mansion House in person, having these good, interesting tussles with each other. And we brought up the spectrum of engagements: council as regulator, council as provider, council as partner. Are we doing with? Who are we doing for? And we really started getting stuck into what co-production looks like when you're in the messiness and complexity of council life, of real world decision making, bringing this to reality, and being able to see how we were starting to develop definitions and frameworks that could allow us to work through real challenges and come up with real solutions, and supporting debate, informing thinking. That for me was a sign of, yes, it's working. And I think the policy, I sincerely hope, will allow us to expand on that and proliferate that practice from being able to have those conversations from time to time in the room together to there being a framework through which we can always think, are we the regulator, the partner, or the provider? Are we doing to, for, or with? Is our practice where it should be? And if it's not where it should be, how do we get it to where it should be? So the enjoyment I had in that real tussle, looking at real problems and seeing how our definitions and frameworks were helping, that felt like a big success, a big light bulb moment. And that's something I hope this policy can help to proliferate.
Thank you, Mike. And just one quick one with regard to the toolkit, regarding timelines and obviously when it'll be ready for us to preview or review.
Again, what I would be wary of doing is making a false promise on behalf of my colleagues. I know things are coming together well and quickly. I'm confident that within, we're talking weeks, not months, I should say. But to give you a full answer, it would only be right for me to liaise with Rox, who unfortunately had to send last-minute apologies today due to a poorly child, and then get back to the group to give you a crystal answer on that. But we're talking weeks, not months.
Thank you, Mike. Are there any other questions or observations for Mike, please?
Mandy, can I come in?
Yes, Leslie.
Right. I've got just a few comments about the actual policy. I think the main one, I think on the whole, the policy looks really good. It seems to have covered everything that we need it to. I can foresee one of the biggest challenges is making sure that when you're implementing anything to do with co-production, is how to make sure that everybody does feel equal, that they've all got exactly the same status. And one of the things I would like perhaps to have included a bit more clearly, in the guiding principles, it says everybody's contribution should be recognised. I think also further to that, I think we've got to make the whole group, whoever they are, have got to make sure that the behaviour of everybody in that group is to respect anybody's comments and also not to belittle anybody's ideas. And I think that is probably going to be quite a difficult task for whoever's mediating that particular group. But I think that's essential, because if you don't make sure that people realise that everyone there is equal and needs to be equally respected, then I think the whole process, as good as it is and as much as I back it, won't work. I don't know, that's really, there are a couple of other things I thought of, but that for me is the biggest thing. Thanks.
Thank you, Leslie. Mike, would you like to come back?
Absolutely. Firstly, to say I concur It's encouraging to hear that point made, and you're right, that's something which obviously we would want to detail in our toolkit, but something I can certainly take back and we can ensure becomes more explicit and more prominent within the policy itself. I completely agree. If you had to distill co-production right down into its bare bones, everyone being around the table, everyone feeling equal, everyone being respected, there being genuine equity, they're the foundations. And if we can't lock those in, then all of those impacts are far less likely to be achieved. You're also quite right, of course, that that's something which is, like I alluded to at the beginning, easy to say and sometimes very subtle and difficult to do. And so ensuring that there are universal principles that we never deviate from, but a diverse range of facilitation tools and approaches we can call upon in different circumstances, that's what feels key to me there. And again, just to allude to what that might look like in practice and what our toolkit may be able to assist with, it's, for example, understanding that sometimes the way you achieve equity is by bringing everybody into the same room at the same time around the physical or virtual table. Other times the way you achieve equity is to speak to people on their turf, get out and about, go to them in their safe places within their communities. Sometimes our silos exist for a reason, and ensuring equity can begin with speaking to people in different places and then bringing those voices together, allowing those relationships and that trust to build over time. Equally, sometimes the best way to start is with a blank piece of paper, making no assumptions. Other times the best place to start is with something in front of you that you can wrestle with, build upon, or tear down. And so I think that the things I can give assurance to for you, Leslie, and for everyone else on the call today, everyone else in the meeting today, is a more explicit reference to those universal principles and ensuring that the toolkit then provides a diversity of approaches that can allow those principles to be adhered to. Not pretending it's easy, but agreeing that it's critical.
Thank you, Mike. Any more questions for Mike, please? We pass it back to Lee then, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So a couple of thanks, first of all, and then a couple of asks. First of all, thank you to this board and committee for the work you've been doing over many months. We've really appreciated your input, and it has really helped us shape our policy and thinking. Second thanks is to Mike and his colleagues at CoPro Lab for the work they put in for almost a year. We've gone to them with many requests, many changes of tact, and they've responded brilliantly each time. Our relationship with them is going to continue for some time yet. They're going to help us with some of the early projects that we adopt for co-production. So not just the end of the policy, will be the end of our relationship with CoPro. So that'll continue for a while. Then in terms of a couple of asks for members of this committee, if they could perhaps go through the policy and feedback their views on it. I know obviously Councillor Walton's done that today, but take more time if you need it. The consultation is open until I think October the 22nd, so there's plenty of time for you to either feed directly back to Rhian or myself, or to use the consultation that's available on the council consultation site. And then the other ask I've got for committee members is, whenever we've come here, you've been really keen to involve hard to reach groups. So if during this consultation period you could flag up the opportunity for people in your communities, your networks, your groups, to look at the policy and just give us views, because the more wide the feedback we get, the more people we can reach and take on board what people are saying. So just those two asks for members today is give us your views, but also try and promote among those harder to reach groups in your areas, if you could, please.
Thank you. There we are then. So we'll move on. Leslie?
Mandy,
Sorry,
can I just very quickly come in? I've actually had two separate emails with the survey attached, but I suspect that it's only gone to certain councillors. Can you double check and make sure it's gone to everybody? Because I think it might have come to me for being on one committee, and also and I'm on the Equalities Board, so I think it might have come for that, but I'm not too sure it's gone to all councillors. Thanks.
Yeah, Councillor Walton, you're spot on. I think it did come to you because you're a member of that board, but also it's gone to all members as well. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. So now we'll move on to item 5, which is the medium-term financial plan. And we've got Mr. Smith with us. Hiya, Ben, you okay?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. And thank you for indulging me joining remotely. This is a for information report in the first instance, so I'm not going to go into much detail in terms of the covering report, which sets out some of the rules about how we do the revenue setting, capital setting, and the medium-term financial plan, and our use of reserves. Also attached for information is the existing MTFP, so that you've got it by way of primer, because to some extent I think you're, as a committee, forming and storming as to what you could do to change elements of the process. But I'm going to be fairly candid in my comments and advice in the first instance, which is it's quite a crowded space, if I'm honest. The budget is a reserved matter for council. It takes advice from Cabinet. All of the budget proposals are themselves subject to the individual scrutiny panels of each of the services affected, plus the overarching scrutiny panels to form views on the budget. And the intention to assist forward planning on the medium-term plan, absolutely laudable. But not only is it a crowded space, it is quite a sensitive space, isn't it, to some extent, in terms of the duty of care. We've got to engage the public fully, but also keep our staff on board in what are, you will not be surprised to know, very challenging times. I was particularly struck with some of the stuff Mike has spoken about, and I've seen him on a number of occasions on things, and certainly some of my comments have been you couldn't have a worse time in some respects to try and prioritise what you're not going to do rather than what you would like to do. I don't think it particularly helps that we're not in an incredibly safe space as councils generally and officers in terms of the tightness of the public finances and the delays to the likely budget setting. I noted in particular in your work plan an aspiration to work through stuff towards the end of October. That has rather had a bit of a coach and horses driven through it by the UK government's decision to push the autumn budget statement back to the 22nd of November, and the Welsh government deciding to announce its budget proposals on the 19th of December, with the likelihood of us having our settlement on the 20th of December and an existing cabinet on the 21st of December. The reason I emphasise that is it will come as no shock or surprise to any of you that given 75% of our funding comes from someone else, and pretty much all our spending is on staff, and we do not set teachers' paying conditions, nor do we set our own local government staff terms and conditions. The ability to have an open and frank discussion in what is a public session at the same time as I'm trying to form and give advice to Cabinet and Council on what may come to pass is a really difficult one and an uncomfortable one for me. I will be guided by yourselves, and I'm open to options and discussions about what you think could work better, but it will not have passed you by that pretty much every element of the trade press in local government says a lot of councils are in a bit of financial difficulty, and when it starts, like the boring stuff I do starts making the front of mainstream papers, you do really need to kind of start to worry about what is going on. But notwithstanding that, there are opportunities, I think, going forward to particularly focus on some of the resilience aspects. So I'll probably stop at that point in terms of a general introduction, because that's probably enough by way of background for an information item, and I'll be guided by yourselves and views onto what you think could be done better, faster, but in an open way. But also, please, I would ask you to recognise that it is challenging when we know so little till quite late on. Local government finance used to be really easy. We used to get the settlement in the sort of autumn and have months to work up budget proposals. No one would design a system that thinks it's a good idea to have budget proposals on the 20th or 21st of December. People tend to be a bit preoccupied on other things, and it does mean that a lot of the business end happens in January or February. But that may be me just exercising too much power as a Section 151 officer and having too much of a closed mind. So I would be interested in others' views on other ways of doing things, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Any questions for Ben? Or any observations, comments? Ben, I would just like to say, obviously as chair of this committee, I understand, probably not as delicately as you do, the financial pressures we're under. I see what's coming in, I see what's going out. So, you know, a huge, huge thank you to the way you perform as a Section 151 officer. And I totally agree with you. We cannot, on the 31st of October, have on the work plan medium-term financial plan when obviously the figures and the preparation won't be ready. So I will suggest to committee that we defer it probably till end of January or end of February, so that you can come back, you know, with a flourishing report and deliver the best you can to us. So probably our aspirations were a little bit pink and fluffy, shall I say? But I'm prepared, you know, with the committee's commitment as well, that we move it forward so that we can discuss it thoroughly once we've got everything in front of us and you've been able to prepare for it. Are there, Leslie, would you like to come in, Leslie, please?
Yeah, yes, please. I'd endorse totally what you've just said, and also just an observation. I think, Ben, you and your team are doing a pretty bloody amazing job considering the ludicrous constraints you're under. This idea of finding out what money you've got just before Christmas. I mean, the whole thing is bonkers. It really is bonkers. So all I can say is carry on doing the job you're doing under extremely difficult circumstances.
Thank you, Leslie. Are there any other comments? Questions for Ben? Ben, would you like to come back with anything?
I thank you, Chair. I think you're right. Certainly by pushing it back into January, February time, you will at least have proposals out in the public domain, which doesn't cut across any of the other reserved matters for Cabinet or Council. And certainly will give you something which is much more refreshed to be able to be looking at those future year developments for years 2, 3 and 4. And I think there will be potentially some stuff to get your teeth into to help guide and inform policy development for those later years. There's always a danger, it's always a difficult year, isn't it? But I think this of all years is particularly difficult. Here I am nearly at the end of September and I will give candid advice to Cabinet, which is, I don't know this month's Teachers' Pay Award, I don't know last April's Local Government Pay Award, and as I've already alluded to, I don't know what's coming in December. Which makes it really rather difficult. I think you've been a bit harsh on yourself in terms of pink and fluffy. I think, you know, in terms of that comment, I think you were absolutely right to aspire to do it in the autumn. If we were in normal circumstances, autumn is about the time we would know the single biggest determinant of what we've got. I think things are a little bit more fragile at the moment because inflation is well above levels that anyone is comfortable with, whatever your political persuasion and views. The problem with a late settlement, is just about managed when inflation is relatively boring and stable and everything else isn't going a bit nutty. But rapid escalations in interest rates, inflation way off anything we've been used to for a sort of decade, does really turbocharge those pressures. I do think there are also some opportunities for some alternative things to be looked at which probably don't fit in any other part of the council space at the moment, because the budget process is heavily regulated in terms of what we can do in law, and also the timeline is incredibly tight. At the end of the day, you have to set a budget by the 11th of March each year, like every council, irrespective of how long it takes. I have placed my order for the DeLorean time machines because I think our council is set for the 7th of March and the Welsh Government is not voting on its final budget proposal until about the 5th or 6th of March. So it will be a little bit deja vu for those of you that have been in the council chamber, where it is likely to result in me presenting on screen last minute changes to the statutory resolution. Let's be honest, that's a bit complicated even for me to understand, let alone trying to do it on screen. But I've been very grateful to members' comments today and their kind words, and also recognising the lateness of it. I do wonder whether there is some opportunity to explore some of the resilience angles, because there are matters that Audit Wales have drawn attention to relatively recently, and as I say, there are resilience concerns across councils, particularly in England at the moment. But there may be some areas to add some value which would be useful for the committee, where perhaps the normal process doesn't reflect on what others are doing. I'm not trying to overly raise expectations, because frankly, if we find any other council in the UK that's got a brilliant process that guarantees they have to make no difficult choices and have got a perfectly balanced medium-term financial plan for forever, I think they're probably in the pink and fluffy land. But I think there are some bits that we could explore to add some value in due course. But I would entirely echo, and I thank members for agreeing potentially to wait until there's some flesh on the bones, where you can at least have a discussion about what's coming in future years and help inform Cabinet's proposals and Council's future proposals. So thank you for allowing me to come back in, Chair.
Thank you, Ben. I'll ask once more, any more questions, comments or observations for Ben, please? There we are then. Thank you, Ben. We welcome your attendance here and thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
So we'll move on now to the work plan. So we'll move. Right, 31st of October, we've got medium-term financial plan. I suggest probably end of January. Is that okay, Ben, for you? End of January, yeah?
Yes, that's absolutely fine. You'll have draft proposals out from Cabinet at the end of December, so people will be in the business end in January. Lee and Rhiannon, when she was here, will know exactly what it's like. It's a little bit crazy then. There won't be finally formed proposals, so there will still be an opportunity for you to help and shape. It'll be very tight on the time frame, but it will give you opportunity to help shape and inform that. So I think that works very well, Chair.
Ben, for your information, we've got no meeting in January. It's scheduled for 27th February because we're on a six weekly plan. So it's the 27th of February. So you've got a couple of more weeks. And we have.
And although that means it's tight to close to council, it still means you've got opportunity to discuss it before a decision is made at council. Yeah. So I still think you have some scope for shaping and influencing the debate and discussion at council.
Okay, right, thank you, Ben. So then 12th of December, we've got workforce transformation. That's quite a large agenda item for us, the leadership management and learning and development. So that's December the 12th. And then we've got Ben returning 27th of February for the MTFP. And then we've got our end of year report to be submitted in April. And this year is flowing by, it is. So it is, I can't see I'm really gas on 14. Yeah. With regards to the 31st of October, I'll refer back to officers and to Cabinet members to see if there's any thing that they would like to add to the work plan. But I will write out to you very soon. I'll do that today now, okay? So I'll call the meeting closed. It's...
Sorry, Chair, just very quickly, as the next meeting, would it be worth having a look at whatever the results were from the co-production survey? I can't remember what the date is, but I think it's sometime in October, but it might not be enough time before the end of the month to do it. But I just think co-production, it's a good thing to keep on it now, because we've got to a point, we've done, and particularly ProLab, have done so much work. I just want to keep the momentum going.
It's a good idea, Councillor. I think we could do it. It might be a bit quick and dirty because it basically give us, maybe a working week to have pulled the results together. But yeah, definitely we could bring something forward. And as long as you bear with us, that it might be a bit quick and dirty, the findings, but we'll take you through them. And yeah, that'll be a really good piece of work for us, I think. So thank you.
Thank you, Leslie.
I think that would be very useful.
Thank you, Leslie. Any more comments? Nope. I call the meeting closed. It's 14:39. Thank you. Take care. See you all next month.